Uzumaki the anime, was it a disastrous mess? Well, in some ways, people in the production have definitely said that it imploded at some point, though the whole details may never come out fully. We don't really know. Maybe we'll never know, but I'm going to give you the best I can of the production history and how it all came to be. The original Uzumaki came from the mind of Junji Ito, a beloved dark horror artist of a generation and shoujo writer, whose reputation has come from his detailed illustrations, many pages revealing banger images and unsettling atmosphere, real strong penmanship. And I'd like to say I'm a fan too. When I was younger, my roommate let me borrow his copy of Uzumaki, which was a heavy book. It's pretty thick. I read the whole thing and I think I came out appreciating both his style and storytelling chops. And I've read a bit since. Like others, I was also kind of interested in this new adaptation, but it's practically a joke now how poorly Ito's work has been adapted in the past in most mediums. So there was a little apprehension at first, which is probably why people were so excited when they actually saw the trailer for this. Shush me, shush, shush. I have something to say, Shh, it's very important. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. It is a website platform for those in digital spaces, young, old, anywhere in between, who basically need a website for all their needs creatively. Oh, look at that. I wanted to make a list of horror anime which I think are worthwhile. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, Squarespace has got you covered with their blog system. You have a lot of customization in terms of how you present that, if it be images. If you want to get that out to people, your fans, you can always try email listing and send it out to those who want a bit of animation, a bit of spookiness all together. Even if you want to mix and match things and release videos alongside your blogs, Squarespace has got you covered with a lot of storage for you to upload things natively to the website itself. So head to squarespace.com right now to get your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can use www.squarespace.com/STEVEM to get 10% off now your website or domain. But the thing that made me interested in the series actually had more to do on the music side of things. That would be Colin Stetson. I was a big fan of his work also in university, and to this day, I've loved a lot of his albums, and his musical chops are pretty unique, especially when it comes to his soundtracks as well. I don't know if anyone else is suited to a production about spirals taking over than someone who knows how to create the most spiralific melody known to man. Alongside that, there was another little staff member who did pique my interest, Nagahama the director. I've been a fan of a lot of his adaptations, and what I noticed about him, every one of his adaptations takes on a very different feeling than the last one. He really sort of dedicates himself to the source material, and he's the kind of guy that I would probably believe that he could actually pull off something like this. But a couple of questions came to me about how you're going to do this, because I look at the designs and think, well, that doesn't look very animation friendly. Realistically, in most instances, you've got to simplify the designs down, and you've got to think about what works best in animation, how you can sort of abstract the medium, use limited animation to your advantage, surreal imagery, and really pump up the ingenuity to create a adaptation that can stand on its own. And then you keep the parts where you're really pushing for the key moments to really blow away the audience. You know, work with a style that benefits the medium, opposed to a medium that it isn't, like manga. Now that's not exactly what Uzumaki was pitching here. They were pitching no loss in detail, basically. They wanted it to look like the original manga in black and white too. Which is definitely a bold decision to make, even though, I mean, these designs, as nice as they look, when you look at the original comic as well, the style actually changes quite a bit. They're not actually super consistent throughout, and things do change over time. Now, the process that Uzumaki was also going to use involved a lot of drawings, not just in like the density of how many lines we're talking about, but they were going to go pretty much to full animation. A regular anime, 3,500 drawings tend to be. That was the average for a long time. To make Uzumaki as they have, which is mainly going to be on 2s and 1s, depending on the situation, we're looking at over 10,000 drawings, maybe 14,000 plus, and the episodes aren't 20 minutes, they're sometimes 30 minutes. So it's a ridiculous amount of drawing, and it's a ridiculous amount of skill ceiling to hit with designs that aren't very animation friendly. So there's a possibility you're going to get something that's quite stiff. So Uzumaki was announced in 2019, but we didn't hear a ton of information for years upon years. I mean, originally it was coming out 2020, then it wasn't, but it got delayed again. But this time it came with an opening scene. Things had changed a bit since the first time we saw it. I wonder what that is. Well, it looks like they had started using the method which would define the series, which was explained in an interview with Jason, the producer. So the process they wanted to use kind of went a bit like this. You would start with motion capture, and from the motion capture you get 3D animators in to sort of refine and adjust it, and you would apply that to 3D models, which were sculptures of the characters and all the little intricacies of those characters. From there, you'd redraw the whole thing in 2D. Not just that though, you'd then have to then bring the animation director in who'd probably adjust and refine and add a little nuances to the animation on top. So you're effectively making the series twice, which sounds both difficult, especially considering how many drawings we're already talking about, and expensive. But I guess Adult Swim had them covered. But we've had pretty much radio silence for a couple years now. I mean, it was 2024, and I thought, Uzumaki is probably dead, right? I mean, Warner Brother changed heads a couple years back, and a bunch of projects got cancelled and stuff, and I wonder if they've just completely wiped out. It's just not a part of the picture, and I would have accepted that. I mean, maybe it was too good to be true. But then this year, we started to hear about it again, and new trailers came out, and I mean, some of the interviews around this time have also talked about how COVID was really bad for the production because they had a sort of small but dedicated core team. A lot of them were affected by the pandemic and affected them if they got ill, or if their family got ill, and that sort of put a real hold on the production for almost a year. So, it's fair enough. And I was probably coming in from a pretty cynical angle because I don't know if it's necessarily the approach I would have taken myself. This attempt is very slavishly connected to the original, and I believe that there is a nuance and sometimes a benefit for an adaptation to take risks and try things that are slightly different from the source material, adjust things. Like they were using the manga as the storyboard at times, and I was thinking maybe that's a bit too tight considering that the needs of one medium and another are quite different. And at the time I'd been watching Hunter x Hunter 99, and I think that a lot of the changes it makes make it a more unique and superior adaptation, all things considered. I guess I was about to eat my words because I saw episode 1 and damn turned me into a believer, because that stuff, they did it. It was crazy. I can't believe they actually pulled it off. I like how there's a lot of attention to detail when it comes to the plants and how they start to spiral a little bit on the edges, or the weight of this walk. In fact, in general, Kiri has a pretty slay as hell walk through the whole series, and it contrasts nicely with her boyfriend's kind of shuffle. And that doesn't even mention the hair, like the wind animated through the hair here. They didn't have to go this hard. In fact, I haven't seen hair animation this hard since, like Angel's Egg, and that sounded like a nightmare. I'll give them credit for the filters that add a sort of textural, sort of pencil quality to the line work, giving it a bit more tactileness. And the work here is so refined, it's hard to tell that these were 3D models basically ever. Maybe they just became Roto at some point with the corrections, I'm not really sure there. But it is reported that Nagahama has looked through pretty much every cut in this episode and done some correction himself. Even when we look at how shots are composed, I really like these close-ups where there's quite a bit of depth. Maybe some of that comes from the 3D model itself, but the way they blur around the edges and move the corners, it gives a real interesting feeling with how the camera lens is affecting the animation. A little uneasy. Look, basically I could just go peek, 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 look at this, wow, 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 they didn't have to go this hard. I feel like the entirety of the video I really wanted to, but at some point you gotta stop, right? Because I might need to get a little pedantic for a moment and talk about things that I didn't think worked quite as well. Most of it's pretty small though. So starting with this text, I am not a fan of the swirling effect here. I think it looks like a plugin of After Effects, kind of basic, and it doesn't really have the nuance that the rest of the animation does, so it feels like it lags behind, especially if you compare it to, say for example, the 2000s live action Uzumaki movie. And I'd say some of the problem also comes from that the font itself has two flat layers, one in English, one in Japanese, and they're just one block item. So when they unswirl, they don't feel like two natural different things that are interacting. It's just one flat JPEG. And some other effects are a little of the same quality, let's say. They've got some stuff here where they take flat drawings and they add a bit of a wobble to it, or a bit of a jitter, and it doesn't look amazing. It could certainly look better if you had done a bit more hand treatment, maybe just drawn 2 frames instead, but that's probably an issue of time. And when it comes to other stuff as well, not always is the animation as full. There are definitely some flat images. I think they tend to work for the context. Usually they're used in flashbacks, but it is something that sometimes can stand out next to everything else being so full on. Okay, but when it comes to my big critique of episode 1, it has to be this sound effect right here. Like, come on. It is the most stock, generic free sound effect I've heard. I've heard it many a times. I mean, what is this, like Red Letter Media or something? It's so basic. And yeah, I think in most situations, someone is not going to notice this. They're not even going to care. But I guess next to how good the sound design and music is in the rest of the scene, it really does stand out like a sore thumb. I don't even think you needed a sound effect in this shot, but I digress. Especially when you consider the rest of the scene's animation quality too is on another level. Like having this on ones, having it so accurate to the manga, it's basically a moving manga panel, but without necessarily the derogatory sense that comes with that word. I will also give credit to the writers, because one of the things I first thought was like, well, Uzumaki is a thick book, it is a tome. How would you adapt this into only 4 episodes? That doesn't seem right to me. They have to cut something. But the way the writer has sort of adjusted the material and moved it around and sort of made it less an anthology of stories and more cohesive is pretty impressive. And they did it in such a way where not really much is missing, at least in the first episode. So let's look at the credits for this episode. Now I do want to say credits don't tell the whole story. In fact, there's certainly elements of this production, including Drive, that would tell you that much. Drive was the studio who originally was supposed to take on Uzumaki under Production IG's assistants as production handlers, but they never ended up being credited at the end in any way. Well, why is that? I mean, I wonder in some part, considering at least one of my sources says that it was a studio basically set up in part to do this animation, but it may come down to Production IG maybe. In terms of Production IG was also working on another show at this time as production handler, and that would be Vlad Love, and that is something that Drive did end up animating on. And maybe they lost the slot. There could be 1,000 reasons why, it's hard to say. COVID could have affected it too. It could go anyway, right? So instead we have Fugaku, who ended up taking the production on, who are relatively new themselves, maybe a replacement, who knows. Haven't done too much work, so there's not much to say about them. Although what I do find notable in the credits is that it had 9 in-between studios working under it, which is quite a lot, but I suppose when you're doing full animation like this, it makes sense. But there is a key to that all, which is Dr. Movie. Dr. Movie was basically the head in-between studio who was then, I guess, organizing the other 9 that they worked with to make sure everything was just where it needs to be. And Dr. Movie has quite a reputation for pretty high quality work. They've been working for Madhouse since the 90s and have even done stuff for Studio Ghibli with Spirited Away. They're on a good level when it comes to production handling, because they're doing in-betweens, colouring, cleanup, all that sort of stuff here. Although they do not work on the next couple episodes, which may explain some things. I mean, after that long wait, and after an episode 1, which I think impressed pretty much everyone, the media cycle was pretty much losing their minds. They were calling this the GOAT of our time already. It was instantly boom, 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 boom. So what happens next left people in both shock and awe about how dramatically different episode 2 looks. We are going to take a quick break for a second before we get back to the video to talk about my Mamoru Oshii series, which we started. We've got the Urusei Yatsura one out already. If you want to check that out, the newest one is still on Patreon, which will hopefully be up eventually soon. But that's going to be a very long project for the channel. If you want to check out more about it, you can see it there. Thank you very much, though, for everyone who's already supported the project as we went forward. So let me thank a lot of the people who made that possible so far. And keep the project's lights on, basically. Pedro Ferreira, Waj, R.G. Palmer, Kitty Cat, Graham, Oscar, Giorgio, Luga, Ian Laser, Curtis, Alexander, Pong, Lenny, Tim James Richards, Stravagen, Chunks, Jay, Fox Mulder, OT, Paul, Steam's Mum, Subsofa, Systematic, Karen, Nick, Doji, Peter, Yegor, Vic, Boss, DTV, Gamveroni, Julius Roth, Alf, SD, Mickey Moon. The way this was advertised involved the US Department of Production IG bigging themselves up as the people handling the production side of things. Though it wasn't actually IG the studio who was doing the animating. There were several studios chose, including episode 2 and 3 having different studios. In an interview with the director with All the Anime, It was mentioned that the production pipeline for Uzumaki was maybe unconventional, and doesn't seem like they were going for a more linear approach where I believe one episode was done at a time. I think multiple episodes, maybe all of them, worked on that. For a similar position, I suppose, mocap would make that maybe more possible. Against maybe people's assumptions, as far as I understand, episode 2 was the last episode to be completed, which does change the context of which we might look at it. One of them involving that the director was not allowed to be involved in this episode, or I believe episode 3, in any way. This was a production mandate, most likely on the Japanese side, which effectively looked at the situation and maybe money too, or maybe they were just frustrated by a million things. And effectively saw, well, it took you too long to do all that correction on the first episode, and we want to get this out eventually in some form, so you're not going to be able to work on that. You're going to have to just be left with episode 4, and these episodes are going to have to be managed by their own production sides. It's kind of extreme because the director was literally banned from even doing meetings with them, and money may well have been a factor on that one, which is something I wouldn't usually say, but considering the expenses of this production, the CGI side, I wouldn't be surprised if they were running out of money at some point. Okay, just stop for a second. Money does not equate quality in animation. I really need to set that down first. It's likely that Uzumaki may have costed more because it's full animation, a lot more drawing, you have CGI, which tends to up the cost, and motion capture. So these factors, as well as time, those can definitely increase cost, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to increase quality, which is here. I mean, they had the money. It's not like the money was stolen from them, as far as we know. The issue usually with animation has a lot more to do with the specific timetable, the staff, schedule, along other things like organization, and if none of that's there, then it can fall apart regardless of how much money you throw at it. There's another sort of issue here which may have fueled it, in that Full Frontal did a podcast on the subject of this series back in February about some of the behind-the-scenes factors in this production. And one of the things they mentioned is, which I think is still true to now, is that the Japanese side has no way of watching this series officially. Okay, I've got to stop once again because since I made this sequence, Netflix has actually picked up Uzumaki, which is, well, if anyone was going to do it, it makes sense that they would because they have a history of picking up different Ito productions of questionable quality sometimes. So I don't really know how much that played into everything. I've heard basically that the animation as a whole was finished last year and they've been trying to wait to get a deal with some sort of Asian partner for a while, which has postponed it. Of course, getting out of the Halloween season makes sense. Maybe this Netflix deal was already sorted beforehand, but it could also be a factor, which is sometimes brought up even by the director, that a lot of anime stuff on the Japanese side, or like television studios, they don't like black and white because they're afraid people are going to freak out that there's something wrong with their television sets. They want it to be colourful, so they're a bit too afraid to do that kind of thing, which is silly because there's definitely some merits to coloured stuff. In fact, I do wonder in some ways how Uzumaki would have looked if it was in colour. If it looked anything like the coloured pages of Uzumaki, which I think are really beautiful and have a distinct palette, I think that could have added a complete new layer to the production and could have created a real different dynamic which could have actually heightened the production at the end. But at the same time, if they had used colour wrong, then they would have gotten no matter of shit from it. I mean, there's a lot of other Ito productions where the colours are something left to be decided, let's say. Something fell off about episode 2 from the complete beginning. Just the way the mouths move. There's some reuse animation, which, it's nice animation. I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do, but the classmates are stiff. While I was actually confused at some points about if they were using the models or not in episode 1, it becomes very apparent in episode 2 that the models are everywhere because of the limit of how much they've, or if anything, drawn over them. Especially since we went from very densely shaded or line shaded characters to these sort of very stock pencil filter that a lot of CGI programs have. There are scenes in episode 1 which mirror it, and you can tell the dramatic difference in what is going on with this production. Even though, if I was to be like technically strict, I don't actually think there's a ton wrong with the drawings we do have in the first 2 minutes of the episode, even if they don't move as much. I think that some of them seem to be corrected. A couple of them might need a little touch up, but it's probably later on where things start to get more confusing on that one. The illusion really breaks when we see a form of JPEGs walking around. This is usually referred to as gekimation, And if you're going to do it, you have to kind of set it up correctly within the scene, and gekimation isn't actually a bad thing. I quite like how a lot of gekimation can be used. Even when it comes to horror, I think there's a whole movie full of gekimation that I'm a big fan of. But here, this is not the way, I would say. You don't want to do it from this angle. It looks stiff and weird, and sometimes the models do move, and it makes for an even more confusing conversation of, well, why did you pose them like that in the first place? Now, there is a right way and a wrong way to rotoscope. And even when drawing over models, you're technically rotoscoping. When you get it right, it's going to feel quite flawless, it feels smooth and nice. But when you get it wrong, everything feels uncanny and weird, like it shouldn't be that way. Another problem might be that it sort of sets a sort of tone and standard where like all the motions have to be this one way. And I guess unless you're a particularly good animator, or you, again, we're talking about a lot of drawings to do that, you're probably going to keep it within that very basic alignment of where the mocap was. There are good cuts in here. There are 2 veteran animators who are in the credits for at the very least, and they probably come from the director himself, who is also a veteran. This man, he's the second director of Urusei Yatsura, the director of Project Eiko. They didn't get like some random guy. This is someone who's got a lot of credence to him. It's like, he knows what he's doing. See, even the faces that are a little bit off, like this one, I think that one that's quite a lot of personality there, even down to the little cat meow. I don't know, I quite like that. Trying to get animators, especially good animators in the industry right now, when the demand is so high and maybe your schedule's kind of misaligned, it's not so easy. So like, I want to give them the credit where credit's due, because it is a thankless job. And it doesn't necessarily mean though that this beach scene, which has become a complete viral sensation, is particularly good. In fact, it's actually very questionable in a lot of ways the whole way through, even before the shot that got clipped. I don't know, I wonder if this was one of the outsources teams, but stuff about this sequence just, it seems really weird. Even the quality seems to have lowered, and there's definitely parts of this episode where quality seems to completely drop, not on the drawings, but in the actual pixel rate of characters. And the beach sequence, well, you could make a whole essay about this one. And I find it a little bit fascinating, because when you look at the original manga, so this sequence is pretty close, roughly to the composition, but this next sequence, that's not the angle, because the original shot is a straight run. But when you look at how this sequence is set up, this sort of angle, I don't think it's necessarily a bad setup in terms of where the island is and the beach, but the way the characters move through it feels really weird. Like, they move like they're running straight, but they now move at an angle and the perspective is completely off. There's definitely some sequences where stuff feels completely unfinished. In fact, when I first saw the sequence, I was like, ha, look, on the beach, on the stairs, they didn't even put that right. Look at the drawing, it's overlapping over the stairs. Amateur mistake, am I right? And now I look at it and go, no, that's a great drawing. I don't even fucking care anymore. Because some of the other backgrounds in this episode just bound me with such confusion. So low polygon, I'm just so confused. Like, there are other shots in the episode which have good backgrounds for similar scenes, but getting back to the beach sequence. The run is not convincing. I'm sorry, mocappers, I don't know if it's you, but like, I don't believe you're running for your life. And even the way they fall. So I was thinking about this for a while, because I was trying to consider, like, so did they just draw over a 3D model that wasn't posed particularly well? Maybe that's the case. But then I looked at episode 3, and there's another scene where people are falling over, and it looks fine. Again, I think this probably is a situation of time, behind the scenes, but it all feels just a bit uncomfortable. And there are just lots of little technical problems here. Where does the back go? Why does he move like a PS2 model in this sequence here? Obviously the mocapping must be quite limited actually in the show, which puts the animators on an even higher pressure level to try and figure out how to work with this. And these punches might bother me the most in the sequence, because there are like at least 2 in the episode, both of them are horrible. Because I look back to the manga again and I go, well, they're just a strong punch side like that. And I wonder, like, well, if you were trying to limit stuff, maybe you would just use a still, and maybe it would have looked even more awkward, I don't know. But yeah, this guy, maybe, I don't know, maybe in the lore of Uzumaki, he just can't punch very well. And maybe if he punched better, his sibling would have not been able to turn into a spinning spiral sea creature and run away. Maybe if he punched a little properly, I don't know. It comes a bit out of random, because in the original manga there are like some panels where you see that, like, from the punch the body starts contorting. So I think that's what this is supposed to be like. I don't know, the abuse men, like, you know, twist and contort their body into this creature. You've got one sequence here. This looks really good, and even the compositing, which this scene has, like, you know, it has the film grain, it's got some darkening on it, some blurs. it's pretty tasteful, and I would say thumbs up. There's definitely a lot of good cuts in this episode that probably go a little underappreciated. Even backgrounds at times, you know, there's some nice harmonies in this sequence here. I'm just happy to have backgrounds that look functional. And I don't know how much I want to give blame on the technical side for things, because I'm not sure if that's some of the studios literally just didn't have strong enough computers to run 3D. And yes, there were definitely some shots where I'm like, I don't think this was finished. I think this is just the previs, and they didn't, if they ran out of money, if they ran out of time, that was just what they had at the end, and they just had to shove it in the episode. And sometimes they definitely have 3D models, but they're not corrected, so they feel weird. Like this angle, it's an interesting angle with the hair and stuff, but like the faces don't look right because they probably need to redraw them, because an average model isn't going to look great from all angles. You sometimes have to adjust and touch them up, and they haven't really done that properly here. So what could have been a pretty sharp cut is sort of mired. A lot of the elements effectively make this a technical disaster in comparison to the first episode. This is something that the production side knew about. Jason, on the producer with Toonami, had sort of admitted, like, yeah, it was a choice between warts and all, or just not releasing it to some degree, and we decided releasing it was the better choice. And I think in the end, yeah, it probably was. There's always room for improvement, and also he speculates here, or he says something here maybe he shouldn't have, which is that they were, quote, screwed over at some point. And I believe since then he's deleted this account and deleted, maybe he got into trouble for that, maybe, making an accusation which could only really be someone on the Japanese side. The Who also gets into a problem, because I don't know if you want people randomly speculating about who fucked over who, because I look at the animation cuts and I'm sure those people saw episode 1, so I bet they're not going, yeah, actually this is my best work, no, this is excellent, like, come on, what's wrong with it? Like, I don't think that any of them are thinking that. The studios behind them, I don't know if they screwed them over, but I guess saying this causes you to put gasoline on the fire entirely. When I first recorded this, I did not actually expect people to start going for the Warner Brothers CEO of everyone when it talks to who Jason might have been blaming. I never really saw that one coming. And I think it's completely unsubstantiated in a lot of ways. I don't think it would be particularly wise to try and make such a comment about your boss, even if it's on the vague, for one thing. But when you look at what the process of Warner Brothers has been when it comes to animation and unlisting things in the last years, it usually was kind of like either kicking it off their streaming service because they didn't want to pay the creators anymore, or it was not putting it on their streaming service at all so someone else could buy it from them, or in some situations it might be just never releasing it to get their taxes back, basically. And Uzumaki is none of these cases. In fact, when you look at what Warner Brothers has been saying the last couple of years, and this year, about anime, they've been talking about increasing production quite heavily, because it's one of the few mediums that's both fairly cheap for them, all things considered, but also hits that 18 to 30 demographic, which is very hard for investors or advertisers and even studios like this to actually take hold of. So I don't really believe it at all. But also, I would honestly say this production was probably death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's just one thing goes wrong and it keeps spiraling out, and when you're trying to do something that's ambitious, it's no surprise really. I don't think that you can find a really easy solution to point at and go, they're the one at fault, because, well, that's just not how life works. Again, because of the compromise in time, another sort of smaller story is kind of condensed at the ending. So you have all these things happen in the episode, and it's kind of just like, oh, by the way, we've got to do this other thing, by the way, because we have to set up for episode 3, so you have to do it really quickly. It's a sequence where the animation quality, again, hits you in constant whiplash. And I'm happy to say that, at the very least, Episode 3 does seem like an improvement. It still has some of the same issues, but it's definitely way, way, way more consistent. When we get to the hospital, this is really strong. Like, I think this whole sequence is pretty there. I mean, outside of a couple corrections, I think they got it completely right. Like, everything about it is great. Beat for beat, it's all there, and it's probably the creepiest part of the, well, for me, maybe the entire manga. And I think that was really captured here. To give its credence, horror is hard, and horror in animation may be even more difficult because the stereotypical way our animes look probably does not lend itself to the most horrific output. So what Nagahama himself has even said is it involves a kind of specialized approach, style, look, and I suppose, especially for him, production method. which costs more than regular animation, while also admitting that, well, it's a bit of a niche. This is not particularly what's in right now. Like horror animation and horror anime specifically is not in vogue. And then you've got to take on the consideration of what Junji Ito's style is. It's not going to make you shiver your timbers. This isn't the stuff that's like, whoa, whoa. It's a little bit more cerebral at times, a little bit more surreal. And some of that imagery might be hard to transfer between the 2D realm and the 3D realm without it seeming maybe a little bit silly, even when it's particularly effective. The scene in episode 1 where the lady is consuming the guy, I look at it and go, well, that's a very impressive cut, but it's kind of making me laugh a lot, because that looks ridiculous. That looks like I fell on the wrong side of Twitter, I don't know. I don't know if that's scary, but yeah, I don't think that's even the point, though. And something that Ito himself has kind of mentioned before.
私もホラー漫画なんですけど、怖いっていうよりはなんか不思議な感覚を与えたいなっていうところがあって、センスオブワンダーっていうちょっと SF にも通じることですけど、奇妙な味を与えたいなっていうのが一番あります。
There was a certain cut I know that got a lot of attention in terms of its Jack-in-the-Box presentation. And I honestly thought it would probably be this bit with the jump scare, because I thought that was kind of really silly and fun in its own way. But no, it was more of this scene. And again, this may be an area where like the adaptation in this episode has its own sacrifices with what is probably the weaker story of the anthology, that is Uzumaki. That kind of gets thrown in at the end. It kind of loses its structure a little bit. And what you get then is out of nowhere, like, oh, Spring Corpse, okay. Regardless, even if this was a little bit better animated, I don't know if people would be going, oh man, spooky. Unfortunately, even if episode 4 is probably the second best of the bunch, it was also berated itself through viral campaigns in terms of especially certain little bits, like this full animation. But realistically, the rest of the cut around here, like this sequence towards the end, is probably some of the tightest animation we've had in the last couple of episodes. And I really think it's a strong, well-animated ending, which is only kind of mired by the fact that it has this weird glow effect added to it, which I didn't think was necessary. It looks like they didn't have, even themselves, enough time to finish it to the full degree. Like there were 12 animation directors for the sequence. That was a bit like, oof, strong for me. Though, looking at episode 3, that one had something like 18, so it's probably even worse. It is unfortunate that it all ended this way in general for Uzumaki, because it had strong aspirations and a lot of ambition. And a lot of things do succeed. I mean, sometimes, yes, the composite animation falls apart, but I would say that for the most part, sound direction, audio was pretty top-notch. I mean, that soundtrack is absolutely phenomenal. I do also really like with that music that Colin Stetson's soundtrack becomes fairly quiet until the spiral itself starts to manifest in people or in the environment, and that's when the music seems to really start playing. Like it's almost like his music is a representation of that sort of foreboding horror in itself. Maybe if we're very lucky, there will be a home release and they can do some touch-up and adjustments, because I think at its core, you're not going to convert 2, 3, 4 into the same as episode 1, but you can make it look a little tighter, redraw the most infamous sections, and make something that probably stands up fairly well, all things considered, by the end. Even if it doesn't hit the heights of episode 1, there is a lot of talent and highlights within each episode, even if, well, what you can say about the production is probably the same you can say about the series, is that it probably ends too quick and didn't have enough time to expand as much as it should have. In instances like this, you can laugh or you can cry. A lot of people laugh, and that is what it is. Though I will give some respect to the animators who did work on it, regardless of what you think of the quality. There was probably a lot of sleepless nights and effort in the last couple of years just to try and get this over the line. And I'll leave this with what Nagahama himself has said about the staff. Let's see, I want people to know that making an anime is a group effort and that so many people were involved in Uzumaki. They gave so much of their time and put so much effort into giving their life to Junji Ito's manga. Please keep that in mind when you watch it.